Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much for choosing this session. This is the first part of the day where you've had a choice. I think you've chosen wisely. I think this is going to be a good session, and one that picks up and develops some of the themes that were being discussed in the previous session with Andy Wyckoff. Because what we're going to do is do a little bit of a deep dive into one particular aspect of the digital revolution, I suppose, and that aspect being artificial intelligence. So, just to introduce myself, I'm Chris Sharrock. I'm the British ambassador to the OECD, and I chair a group at the OECD called Friends of the Digital Economy, really trying to support the work that Andy's doing with his Going Digital project. And I'm just going to set the scene very briefly before allowing what I think is a really exciting panel of experts to run through some presentations and then hopefully leave us with some good time to have a discussion amongst ourselves, and of course that includes you. So first of all, it's always helpful to define the subject at hand, and artificial intelligence is a subject which is talked about so frequently at the moment that you may well have a certain idea in your mind of what it is. As we talk about it at the OECD at the moment, what we're really talking about is, I suppose, machine learning, and what we're now able to do with the combination of huge advances in computational power on the one hand, and enormous volumes of data on the other hand, and the ability of computers, machines, to be able to detect patterns in that data, therefore improving the accuracy, lowering the cost of predictions, doing various tasks which previously required human cognitive skills. What we're not yet talking about at the OECD is anything like the idea of consciousness in machines. We might get into that. My definition might well be challenged. We might get into that, but at this point in time, we're really in that space of machine learning. And you know, this is obviously a very important moment for the development of that technology. It promises to deliver radical productivity gains, and it is subject to an enormous amount of attention, including from the deep pockets of the financial world. So in total, more than $50 billion was invested in AI startups during the period 2011 to 2018, more than 50 billion. AI startups have so far attracted about 12% of all worldwide private equity investments in the first half of 2018, and that's an increase from 3% in 2011. And that share, that number, is increasing in all major economies. It's a very strong story in my country, the United Kingdom, where I saw some OECD figures suggesting that the UK received something like 58% of all private investment into AI in the European Union. So it's something which we're doing quite a lot of, but this is happening everywhere. So if finance is putting its money there, that is because they detect economic return and economic benefits. And what we're doing, of course, in this conference is talking not solely about the bottom line, about GDP, about profit and loss, but also about broader benefits. And it seems equally obvious that there are going to be broader societal gains from the application of artificial intelligence. To pick a couple of examples, in transportation, autonomous vehicles, which we are hearing so much about, promise improvements in cost, in safety, in quality of life, and environmental benefits with virtual driver systems, high-definition maps, and optimized traffic routes. In healthcare, AI helps to detect health conditions, helps to deliver preventative services, discover new drugs, facilitate research, and optimize health systems. Of course, in financial services, we see the application of AI to detect fraud, assess creditworthiness, reduce customer costs, automate trading, and help with legal compliance. So we've got a positive story economically and in terms of the benefits to society, the well-being benefits, we should say. But at the same time, there are increasing numbers of important policy and ethical questions which are being raised. Data. We just had a good discussion about data with the previous panel. AI relies on data. Without this enormous flow of data, this machine learning, this AI, could not operate. And it leverages this new data in fundamentally new ways. There's network effects, there's scale effects. There are companies looking at how to enhance access to data. And of course, there's questions about how that data is collected, who owns the data, whether people are knowingly transferring their data. There's privacy questions around transparency and oversight of AI-powered decisions. Quite often we don't really understand what's happening in these black boxes. That's by design. They improve themselves, they improve their processes. We don't know precisely what's happening. How do we know precisely how the data is being used? Safety and responsibility, autonomous vehicles, who owns the data, who's responsible or liable for an injury caused by an autonomous vehicle. The list of questions goes on. So we've got a very clearly established positive case. We've got a set of questions being posed, and this is the subject that we are going to get into today. So each of our guests is going to speak for about 10 minutes. Mainly to PowerPoint presentations, and then we will have conversation as the session goes, and then we will try and preserve some space at the end. So I'm going to invite our first speaker to come to the podium, I think. You're going to speak from the desk, so that's very wise if you've got notes, that's what I'm doing. And I'm very pleased to welcome Hanan Salam, who is a co-founder and head of education and research at Women in AI. And Hanan holds a PhD in artificial intelligence, a BSc and an MSc in computer science and telecoms engineering, and is currently the head of research and development at AI Emergence, a startup in robotics and artificial intelligence that specializes in robots for home security. So, Hanan, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. I'm so glad I'm here. So, I don't see my presentation. No? No. Okay. So, I'm gonna speak to you about AI and how AI, some examples of how AI is used in well-being. Okay? So nowadays, when we talk about the future, it's really hard for us to keep AI out of it. We are imagining that everything is being smart and equipped with AI technologies, and it is all for the benefit of our well-being. So let me explain a little bit about well-being. I know you all know what well-being is, but from a definition of well-being, according to WHO, the World Health Organization, our well-being is comprised mainly of 6 dimensions. That is emotional, spiritual, intellectual, occupational, physical, and social. Now, AI is playing and will be playing a big role in how the future of well-being will be transformed. So I will start by showing you some examples of how this is happening. For example, starting from the health sector, thanks to AI, we are now capable of making significant health predictions. For example, there's a startup called Fitbit that, in addition to monitoring the physical activity of the person, it detects if the person is at risk of developing diabetes or not. And AI is also very promising in helping with mental health issues. There are lots of startups and research clinics as well that are working on the identification and diagnosis and prevention of mental health issues. Take, for example, Mindstrong, which is a startup that is working on using the smartphone data in order to detect depression before it even arises. So the company will detect if the person is at risk of developing depression. It will warn him and facilitate the intervention of a professional before like the symptoms become severe or chronic. And some research centers have gone further into developing virtual therapists that are capable of conducting human-like therapy sessions just by talking to the users or to the patients and analyzing their social cues. Okay, and some patients have claimed that they feel more at ease when they interact with a virtual therapist because they feel that they are less judged compared when they are with a real therapist. Okay, and AI is also very promising for avoiding addiction, whether it is drug abuse or internet usage or alcoholism or any other addiction. And there's also this startup that is called Educate that is working on that. So imagine that the user is someone who is dealing with alcoholism. So the application would use the GPS in order to detect if the person is approaching to a bar or to a liquor store, and it will then intervene to give him a hotline and provide him some coping techniques. And other than the health sector, the hotel room of the future is also being developed at Marriott. In this room, the guest is capable of controlling everything in the room, starting from the room temperature to the lighting, and thanks to AI, the room will be capable of saving the preferences of this user in case he decides to come back to the room. AI is also promising for helping with monitoring sleep. For example, this is an example of a technology called S+ from a company called ResMed, which tracks the sleep and monitors the sleep of the user through a device that is put next to the bed. And it proposes, when it learns about the sleeping pattern of the user, it proposes also ways to improve this sleep. This is another example, which is a smart pillow that does approximately the same thing. And this is also concerning the elderly care. So AI will play a major role in helping taking care of the elderly. Okay, so there are lots of robots and monitoring devices that are being developed. And this is an example. It's a robot called Steve. I don't know how to. It's a video normally, so I'm not sure how to. Okay, anyway, there was a video. So the video will show you that this person has dementia, so he forgets things. And so he speaks with the robot and he asks him, for example, will you please go and check if the oven is still on? And so the robot does that. And now moving to the security sector, this is a robot. There was a video as well here, but unfortunately it's not there anymore. So this is a robot I was working on, which is a security robot. It is called E4, and it is supposed to replace the conventional alarm system. And so it will do tours in the house and detect if there's an intruder or if there's something going on, like a water leak, a fire, and anything that's like a problem in the house. And it will warn the owners when they are not there. So I will not keep saying examples. This is my last example and my favorite one, which is how AI will help in improving the learning experience of students in the classroom. So I am a professor, and I can assure you that it is really hard to keep an eye on every student and to keep the engagement state of the students high when you are lecturing. Not to mention that each student has his own preferences in learning and the method how he likes to learn. So now imagine that there's an observer robot in the classroom that will be there to observe the student and to analyze their personality, behavior, and their engagement state. And it will then export a report to the teacher, and then the teacher would use this report in order to implement strategies to increase the engagement of the students. So this is a dream that will become true because there are lots of research centers working on that now. But yeah, so okay. So the list is very big, and I have only covered a very small portion of the possibilities of using AI to well-being and the sectors as well. And what I want to say that all of these technologies are really exciting and interesting, but they do not come without ethical implications. And I hear you thinking, okay, this is really cool, but what about the human-human interaction, the human aspect, and what about, for example, the privacy of the data? There is something about the human interaction that is really important and that adds value to any interaction, whether it is a therapy session, or any other thing. And also, when we give the care to the robots, it's like we are transferring our responsibility to these robots. So the question is, how far should we take this? And if we take it too far, how can we assure, protect ourselves and our humanity? And the answer is that we can take it as far as we want. We can take it as far as we want, as long as we keep in mind that we are the humans, we are the ones that are creating these technologies, and we can create ethical solutions. However, to create ethical solutions, we have to start by defining what is ethical, what is right and what is wrong, okay? Which is something that might be really difficult because ethics differ from one culture to another and from one continent to another. For example, what is accepted in Japan might not be accepted in the United States or any other place, okay? So the first step, in my opinion, okay, is to start by thinking how do you want it to be, this specific AI solution or this specific AI solution for a specific sector like health, okay? And the first step we can take is to create a consensus about ethics, which requires the federation of skills in multidisciplinary teams, starting from sociological sciences to legal definitions, in addition to well-being professionals and AI experts. So if we create this consensus and we start from there, we are able to implement this ethical framework in our solution. And finally, I would like to conclude by saying perhaps that a hybrid AI human wellness professional is the best solution. And you should remember that the goal is not to replace wellness professional, but to provide assistance to them. So we have this chance and this challenge in our hands to bringing humans and computers together in order to create solutions for our well-being. So we have to take this chance. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Hannah. Very helpful that you raised the ethical questions there at the end. I pick up on something that Andy Wyckoff said in the last session. At the OECD, we're not techno-determinists. We don't believe that we're necessarily traveling inexorably down a preordained path. There are policy decisions and choices that we can make. But as we get into the space of ethical debate, we get into a space which is loaded with cultural priors, with some normative judgments that needs to be made. John's going to talk about that in a minute. Before you do, I just want to pose you one question. It's very striking to me that your examples tended to be robots. And of course, the phenomenon of automation is another strand of the digital revolution, which is happening and is happening, very quickly. We've had robots in car factories for a long time. Robots in the home, that is a new development. AI and robots, you put the two together. Is that because for you the questions really come up in that space in terms of human-machine interface as the AI is personified in a robot?
I'm not sure I get your question.
Well, I suppose an AI function can be done by a computer in a box. It doesn't need to have a robot face.
First of all, I would like to say that, like, as humans, we not only that we have our brains that do the algorithms, but we are smart by our bodies. Okay. So when you touch a person and we feel something, this is also intelligence. Okay. So what we are doing in robotics is that we are embodying, okay, the brain. We are giving it a body, and this body is also there are lots of researches that are done in order to give this intelligence to our body. So we are not only smart by our brains. This is my point of view. We are also smart with our bodies because, for example, in order to walk from here to there, okay, it takes us like, I don't know, 1/10 seconds, milliseconds, I don't know how much. But for a robot to do it, like, it takes 1 year of research, for example. So this is also artificial intelligence. Okay, that's why I have spoken about robots, because for me, artificial intelligence is not only the algorithms, it's not only the brains, it's also the brains and the body and the intelligence in our body.
Thanks, that's really helpful. I knew my definition would be challenged immediately, and there it is. I think that's a really helpful contribution. Thanks for your presentation. I turn to John, as promised. John Haydens, who is Executive Director at the IEEE Global Initiative on Ethics of Autonomous and Intelligent Systems. And John is doing, well, a lot of work there, but one in particularly relevant piece of work is the work on the standards working groups, and perhaps particularly around the standard P7010, which you chaired a group on. So that's a standard which is looking at well-being metrics, standards for ethical artificial intelligence. So this feels very relevant. So John, over to you.
Cool. Thanks. I'm going to talk.
Feel free.
How y'all doing? Hello. I'm just going to get this out of the way. I am so honored to be in the presence of Professor Stiglitz. I don't mean to embarrass you. I play blues guitar. This is like saying, hey, go play guitar in front of Eric Clapton and enjoy. But I just have to say that. I'm so honored to be here, and in terms of well-being, kind of bursting, and in terms of gratitude, I couldn't be more grateful to be on this panel. Thank you to Chris and to everyone else here. My work, Chris talked about it. IEEE is the world's largest technology association. It was created about 130 years ago by Thomas Alva Edison. There's over 420,000 members in 160 countries. It is, without exaggeration, the global heart of the engineering community. And I did not know who they were up until about 5 years ago. And I wrote a book called Artificial Intelligence. The subtitle is Embracing Our Humanity to Maximize Machines. And I spoke at the South by Southwest conference, and people from IEEE were there. And I was thrilled that they were there. And I went and pitched them basically and said, look, I think if anyone's going to build a code of ethics for artificial intelligence, it should be you. I have many friends who are ethicists and philosophers, but it's sort of a joke, but it's also true. Would you rather ride in an elevator built by engineers or ethicists? The answer is probably engineers, but you have to have the ethicists in there with you. So, in my book, I asked this one central question, and I heard this asked a lot today about values. The question is, how will machines know what we value if we don't know ourselves? And it's a literal and figurative question, and a lot of the work that we do in ethics is to move away from ethics for compliance or risk and ask more questions about values, and also think about how design is done at the outset of what is built. And if at the outset of what is built you can rethink what are the end user values of what we're trying to build based on the fundamental premise also of honoring human rights, then a lot of what you can do is get specific to the last question. Hanan gave me a great thank you so much for your introduction to the work that I'm going to talk about. Anyway, the two things that I run, one is called the IEEE Global Initiative on Ethics of Autonomous and Intelligent Systems. The other is something called the Council on Extended Intelligence, which is a newer program we're very excited to be doing with the MIT Media Lab. I should say too, just because disclaimers are great, the views expressed here in this presentation are mine, don't necessarily reflect IEEE per se, an official position statement. Don't worry about reading this slide. what I want to explain to you, just because, you know, it's a lot of words. One thing we've created since 2015 is this paper called Ethically Aligned Design. It started with about 80 to 100 American and European experts in philosophy, ethics, data science, artificial intelligence, people from who were anthropologists, marketers, and we said, look, we're going to set up a bunch of committees in areas like personal data, law, embedding values. Pretend you're at a conference around the coffee machine and talk about the issues that are most pressing to you today. Write those issues down. Think of your colleagues and the academics and also policymakers who will read this paper. Save them time, expedite their work, and talk about these issues and provide initial recommendations. So we released the first draft of this paper in 2016, and thankfully someone on the team was very smart to say, A, let's release this as a Creative Commons document so it's free, and Creative Commons means anybody who wants to use it, please do. And secondly, someone was brilliant and said, release it as a request for input. We have to ask what other people think. So we wouldn't be ludicrous enough to say, hey, here's the answer to ethics and artificial intelligence and a massive feat of hubris, which we didn't do. And what was so exciting, and I say this because I'm honored to be here in Korea, is that the feedback we got after version 1, we got a ton of feedback from South Korea, China, and Japan, saying thank you for this work, but it's very Western. Have you heard of Confucius? Have you heard of Ubuntu ethics in Africa? And it was incredibly helpful to start thinking of the values that make a culture, both at an individual and a societal level, have to be measured. So that's the paper, and this is more about the paper. But what happened is we wrote the paper, and then we realized, because the program that I'm run is under something called the IEEE Standards Association. So the Wi-Fi that you're using was actually created because IEEE created the Wi-Fi standard. If you haven't ever developed a standard, first of all, it's very hard, because what you do is you get like 50 to 200 people to either be in rooms or talk on phone calls for 2 or 3 years and come to agreement on how to build very complex technological things. Now add to that mix, we've created all these standards that are focused on the intersection of technological interoperability and ethics. It gets even harder. And one thing we realize is beyond the cultural aspects of some members live in Korea, some members live in India, is there's an actual sort of translation between engineers, philosophers, and marketers, even when they all speak English and they're from America. There's this mindset of what are we most prioritized on what we want to build. And so for the ethically aligned design, we created the Wellbeing Committee, and I'm honored my colleague Laura Musikansky, who's here in the front row with the Happiness Alliance. I went to her and I said, you're the smartest person I know in this space. Help me figure out how to tell engineers and data scientists that they need to know about this community, the well-being community. And whether we need to call it well-being or happiness or make up a name, kind of who cares? Because the point is where technology is built only from a single bottom line methodology. That is where AI could kill us. It's not killer robots. It's the prioritization of exponential growth. Because here's a little news. Autonomous and intelligent technologies, by design, are designed to accelerate learning, are designed to do things for us that may be complex. Per the presentation we just saw, that can be majestic and beautiful in terms of all the wonderful aspects of what that can do to improve humanity, the SDGs, etc. However, when still the key performance indicator for how all this technology is created, even if people don't realize it, comes from single bottom line growth. Single bottom line growth, exponential growth combined with exponentially fast technology, that's the risk for humanity over any sort of science fiction oriented killer robots. I mean, those aren't great, but that's not the point. So we went from this well-being committee, and because this is part of the Standards Association, we said it's critical now to really speak, as it were, the language of engineers. And engineers, if you haven't done standards work, you can take, like, say, 2 pages to describe, I'm moving my finger from left to write. And I'm not an engineer. This took me a while to get used to. But I have to say I've grown so enamored with engineers because I'm more of an emotional person. I used to be an actor, I'm a writer, and describing my feelings is something I can do. But then when you learn someone who has the skill to describe in intimate detail how to move the finger from left to right, so that anybody, once that document is translated into other languages, will know exactly how to build what you're talking about, it is a glorious exercise in consensus building. So Project 7010, Laura's the chair, I'm vice chair. We have about 50 or 60 global, brilliant, awesome, amazing people. And really what we're trying to do is take this set of indicators and say to the engineering and data science world, A, do you know what these are? So one is to create awareness. Two is to say, do you understand the triple bottom line systems thinking idea? The great news is engineers do. Systems thinking is built into the core of who they are. And then say, well, say you're building like an autonomous vehicle and you're trying to eradicate risk. Awesome, less human death through driver error. But what about the fact that you're also going to be saving green space? How are you measuring the green space that you're giving back to the planet? And a lot of times the answers are, don't know. So then you say, well, the Happy Planet Index, the Sustainable Development Goals, these are these different parts of the BLI from the OECD. This is now data. Whether some of the indicators are not as robust as the BLI, et cetera, that's not the point. The point is to translate the world of this world, the well-being indicators, to the world of the engineers and the data scientists. So when things are designed, they can be designed from a triple bottom line mindset. And by the way, this is a pitch, but it's a nonprofit. IEEE is a nonprofit. We'd love to have you join this work. It is free to join. Enjoy. See, I pitched you, but it's all free. So it's not really a pitch. Lastly, just in my last couple of minutes, what I've hopefully demonstrated is this sense of going, what we say, from principles to practice. Principles are great. Lists of principles for AI, things like accountability, transparency, wonderful. But now is the time to also say principle is the next step. That's why we built ethically aligned design. It's 300 pages. The media teased us in version 1 and 2. They said things like, Isaac Asimov's laws of robotics were 3 rules and you took 300 pages. And I'm like, cool. Ride in the elevator with 3 lines of code. I'll ride in mine, right? But going from standards to think about AI. AI to me, because I've been in the space now so intimately, is like the air we breathe. Data is fundamentally part of who we are, even if we don't see it. It informs the majority of almost every system that is built or will be built. The thing that I'm often thinking about now in the Council on Extended Intelligence that I mentioned is immersive reality. This artistic picture is this sense of augmented and virtual reality. Are the manifestations where some people are like, I'm never going to use augmented reality. And my answer is, well, someone is. So I'm a dad. I'm a father. It's very easy to get caught up in the semantics of saying, well, virtual reality tools are not available in every country, not every house. Semantics. Alexa, these beautiful tools. Again, the tools themselves are not the problem. The problem is the fact that these things enter our consciousness, and because our data is tracked, they start to affect our agency, and especially with kids. The ethically aligned document, the standards. Now, what I'm also trying to do with my work is to say the engineering community knows about this well-being world. The augmented and virtual reality community needs to know about well-being metrics as well. Because more and more who we are, our agency, how our lives are affected, and again, kids under age 10, 9, 8, and 7, kids that age do not know what a non-digital or non-immersive world looks like. And remember, immersive doesn't mean it's just about your eyes. Audio bots, how they've already entered the consciousness of how kids speak, ask for stories, ask for advice. There's a parenting aspect to these devices where, for instance, with a GPS, I don't really lament the loss of paper maps. I can fight with my wife about other things. Kidding. However, losing the ability to parent because a child prefers the autonomous or intelligent device in their house, It's not up to you what someone else prefers. And again, going back to my first question, how will machines know what we value if we don't know ourselves? The answer is, we would love your help to find out how. Not just to keep people safe, but to know that we're moving into the future with provably aligned values, prioritizing human and environmental well-being. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, John. You touched on a couple of issues that we could develop, but probably shouldn't. Parenting being one of them. I think all of us with children know the decisions that you have to make in terms of allowing your child to interact with the technology. I think that's one thing. You also touched on the concept of the triple bottom line, which I haven't actually heard talked about today, but that's an accounting standard that brings in environmental and social aspects as well as financial. Now, look, a quick question for you. IEEE is a technical standards body, as you yourself said at the start. Ethics are quite a long way from technical issues. Shouldn't we arguably have, I don't know, the Pope, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and various religious leaders alongside the great philosophers thinking about these things? What gives a technical standard-setting organisation locus on the issue of ethics?
Oh, it's a great question. I think there's different bodies of thought amongst engineers, and again, I'm speaking for me, John, not officially the IEEE position, just because the nature of the organization, nonprofit, is also that. The formal position comes from the board. That said, I think when you think about a device that has effective computing, meaning it is built to analyze human emotion, and it is put inside someone's home, the second someone says, I built this, there's no ethical aspects to it, is bad design. We don't have to think about ethics and morals all the time. Your point is perfectly, and I can bring up a good example if there's time, about the cultural aspects. Really quick, a robot you build in the States, in general, eyes would look at each other's eyes. In general, a lot of times in some Asian cultures, the robot's eyes would look down. It's a sign of respect to look down. That's a design aspect where you do your due diligence and understand the work from the get-go. So I think what engineers are realizing, and the work that we're doing, which is so exciting, first of all, is that engineers don't have to do everything alone. Why would you not have anthropologists, child psychologists on your team when you're putting a device that will have effective computing sensors in front of kids? That's like saying you're building a car and you only have people building the exterior of the car, not the engine, for lack of a better analogy. So what I think is so exciting, and again I give credit to the people that I'm working with at the IEEE Standards Association, especially leadership, is they're supporting the idea that there is no really ethically inert technology. An object becomes an artifact depending on who and the context of where that object is placed. And if you don't ask what are the ethical or values-driven considerations, then you will not design the object, A, to eliminate as many unintended negative consequences as possible, and you certainly won't understand all the innovation and all the wonderful new avenues to protect people with these amazing technologies in regards to human data, identity, and emotion.
Thanks, John. That's really helpful, and helpful that you touched on cars, because that gives me a neat segue into our next speaker, who is sitting to your left, Dr. Young-Tai Kim, who is the Secretary General of the International Transport Forum, which is a part of the OECD. Dr. Kim was elected by the transport ministers of the ITF member countries back in June 2017, so has been in post for just over a year. Prior to being at the ITF, Dr. Kim, many of you will know, was here in the civil service in his native Korea, and most recently as Director General in the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport. So, over to you, Young-Tai.
안녕하세요. Good afternoon, everyone. For those who visit Korea for the first time or visit my native country should learn at least one expression. 안녕하세요. So that means hello and nice to see you. So repeat after me. 안녕하세요. Okay, that's a good lesson. So I'm going to deal with a very specific area of the things that you feel every day and you observe every day. So this is kind of more concrete discussions compared to the previous presentations. Because AI is roughly we feel that we know the notion and we feel that we are having step by step more concrete things in the future, but basically there are so many different aspects in this discussion, including some philosophical, ethical, and technological stuff. So now I'm very happy to present you with some of one of the most concrete things that we can find in daily life. So with the title New Transport for the New Digital Age of Well-being. So some of you might remember last year or 2 years ago, I don't remember exactly, but there was a match between human and the AI, the master, the imaginary, the master of the deep mind, Google Go Master. And the number one of Korean Go Master, he was laughing at the press conference, and finally he lost. He won one game, but he lost 4 games, so in the end he lost in general. So his face turned a little bit serious, and another number one of the China, the Go Master, also challenged this, the deep mind, the Go Master, and he finally lost. He didn't win any game of 5. So he finally cried, but it means something, because for the Korean people who really enjoyed playing this Go game also felt very sad when they basically knew that the human beings lost against a machine, but the machine was quite strong. So maybe I can present the notion of artificial intelligence as follows. Self-learning capacity is, I think, the core concept of intelligence, artificial intelligence. But fascinating, but scary, because we also remember the movie called Terminator. So from the future, somebody came to kill the hero. So we have the double sentence regarding this tremendous tool in our daily life. And some points to share at this stage, I summarized as follows. Unless it has a self-learning capacity, is a kind of high-performance machine. So basically, artificial intelligence versus machine, maybe we can categorize 2 different things. There can be also different perspectives. It can play a useful role in the rational decision-making process first, but it can also have some emotional aspects of human being, step by step, kind of imitation. And it can reflect the robotics, surely, in different ways. And it can be good, for it can solve information asymmetry problem. And it can be bad, for it can make people subject to other beings. So the German author, his name was Erich Fromm, once wrote the book, Escape from Freedom. So we do not really want to be responsible for our decision. So we very much depend on other things, the external things. So maybe if we too much count on the artificial intelligence, maybe we might lose our basic instinct or basic motivation to make very important decisions. And some people might opt for back to the past. Maybe we can be sick and tired of new things, and because there are several trends that repeat in the past. So even in the fashion area, sometimes we try to wear the 50s and 60s mode. So some people might prefer for returning to the past. And as of now, we can say human beings are present in artificial intelligence. They write algorithms, curate data, and teach learning machines how to teach. So far we are dominating the machines, but it's scary because one day we might be dominated by them. Does AI contribute to the promotion of well-being in the transport sector? The answer is yes, as of today. What can be the advantages? So in terms of individual and in terms of society, I categorize two different areas. So in terms of individuals, individuals can have more choices because they have more information. So we can solve a problem of information asymmetry. And also we can save time. When we plan to travel to a certain destination, maybe we can find a perfect combination to save money and time. Maybe to pay more, but at least to save time. And we can make a easier planning. And also autonomous driving, we are now developing step by step, but there are also controversies if we have a full automation in car industry. Some people predict that we will give up owning a private car because we can easily use the shared mobility and we can use a very smart public transportation. But on the other hand, some people predict that no, we can have more cars, more private cars, because the cars will no longer the conventional meaning. Cars are conventional meaning. It can be a moving office. So in the car we can watch movie, we can enjoy private space, we can do whatever we want. So there are still controversies. And in terms of society, there is a paradigm shift because these days you have the bus routes. So when you commute to your workplace and you get out of your house and you check the existing bus route, but if a transport system becomes smarter and smarter, you can create your own route. Not only you, but also other people can create most efficient routes every day. They can be different from yesterday. And also, artificial intelligence can contribute to the promotion of decarbonization because we very much depend on fossil-based fuels these days, but we are now trying to use the new fuels and electricity. And also, it can contribute to the universal access for those who are in difficult situations, those who are living in remote areas, and also so-called disabled people. And safety and security concerns individual and at the same time the society. So there are two sides of the coin, and there is a link between transport and other areas, which is really important because transport is not a transport itself, and transport can be a tool for realizing something new. So benefits we can imagine, we can summarize economical benefit and sustainable benefit and inclusive benefits. So artificial intelligence in general helps to make seamless mobility as a service possible because we are becoming more and more connected. So connected means that we are exposing to a system that we become a part of something bigger than ourselves. So these days we are discussing also the big data, the issue which is quite important and very sensitive because if we really want to build an efficient artificial intelligence, we need, first of all, we need to get more data to analyze more properly and more pertinently, more realistically. So, but in that process, always there are some controversies about the privacy. When I was in the ministry also, we needed a lot of information from private sector because these days, private company, they provide a lot of efficient GPS system in the car. But how we can get them was a really big challenge, always. Still, we do not have any a single solution, but sometimes we have an illusion that all the data in the private sector can be provided freely to the government, but I think it's not true. Maybe we can pay for that. So data which is not important for them might be very important for public good. So I think this kind of thinking differently can be a really important thing. And we have also the electric car and helps to relax, as I mentioned, in this private space. You can study, you can even drink while moving from one point to another. And nowadays we are also talking about car sharing, so it's a shared mobility. So these days we choose to use the term mobility instead of transport, because transport means something hardcore and infrastructure. But mobility is like a software. So we are talking about car sharing, but which is also can be promoted by artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence helps to detect also dangerous situations and suggest or take actions to improve safety. And in monitoring systems or in automated vehicles, helps ensure better traffic efficiency. So some of you might already feel that every day you find something new, but still we are in the transit period, and remaining challenges in transport sector can be summarized as follows. So sharing personal information is very important and sensitive, and how to create new job opportunities, because it can also have a great impact on the existing industry. So some artificial intelligence can destroy some existing jobs, but also it can create some new jobs. So how government can play in this transit period to maximize the social benefit of this transit process. And cybersecurity. Safety is very important, especially when we depend very much on the system, the automated system. If some bad man makes some bad decision, finally we can be threatened by the terrorists. And personal choice and social consensus is always a big issue. And technology versus socially agreed value, it concerns also ethical aspect. I think in the transport sector, we cannot solve this problem only with the transport expert. So we have to also collaborate with the experts from other areas. And governance system, how can we govern and make a efficient governance system for the new era? And management of transit period, upgrading existing infrastructure, conflict with existing industries. This is kind of political aspects. Uber is still illegal in Korea. A lot of taxi drivers, they protest. But a lot of civil servants recognize that Uber is quite practical and pragmatic. But it's not easy to implement the government, the policy. And also, infrastructure is a huge area that requires a lot of investment. So once we decide to build a certain infrastructure, it's not easy to change, or maintenance problem is a big issue. So reflection, also especially reflections on the labor aspects. I would like to highlight one examples. And some optimists say it's like a Schumpeter, creative destruction of industries and job innovation, and also outer cuts, technology created more jobs than it destroyed it. And Adam Smith, self-adjustment of market. I'm very scared to talk about some economic theories in front of Eric Clapton areas. And pessimists say technology is destroying more jobs than creating more jobs. And also computers are smarter than human beings, so kind of skeptical aspect. But no need to be too pessimistic, because cases of email versus post office. So when we had more, the change in the post office system, a lot of people predicted that we would have less post mails. But nowadays, for example, the Amazon, the logistics system, we can do a lot of shopping online. Still, the physical delivery of goods and services are still in operation. And jobs requiring heuristic and insightful approaches are hard to be done by machines. Because anyway, still we can say that AI, the perfect sense of AI, we do not have it yet, but still we can have our own options to define how we can create and design our future artificial intelligence. And people will be more and more interested in value-adding work in the long run. And multidimensional work combined with different sectors will be prevailing. And it's a matter of time. So we tend to discuss the final stage of everything, but basically in the process, even when we discussing the autonomous vehicle, there are 5 stages from the rudimentary the automation stage to full automation stages. So we have to know that And ITF now is working on the prospective and futuristic themes like algorithm governance in transport and new directions for data-driven transport safety. So ITF is a think tank, global think tank. We are dealing with different aspects of transport and collaborating with the international partners. So we are kind of very efficient platform. So I think we have a lot of things to do in the future and a long way to go, but I think this kind of collective discussion is a very good opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Yongtai. Really good to have a bit of a deep dive into one sector. I'm conscious of time. We've got two more presentations to get through, so I'm going to turn straight to Mujan Asghari and ask you to come to the podium. Mujan is Hacking House Manager at Sigfox. I have to say I'm not entirely confident I know what Hacking House Manager is. I guess you manage the Hacking House. You're an adventurous entrepreneur and a self-confessed tech obsessive. Look forward to hearing your presentation. If you could try and keep to 10 minutes, that would be really helpful.
Hello, 1, 2, 3, right. Hello everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here. It's my first time in Korea, so far so good. It's been amazing. So I'm going to talk about basically some of the use cases that we have today in AI, and more specifically in hardware, because I'm a big fan of hardware too, and Hacking House is basically a program on IoT for young generation, young children, young students coming from all around the world into the Hacking House to hack on the problems that we have today. So the last week actually was a demo day. We had a fire detection sensor and some of the basic products of that. Just very quickly, I'm based in Paris. I'm originally from Iran. I'm also one of the co-founders of Women in AI, and my presentation will be also focused on gender diversity in AI. So we talked a lot about AI, all the applications, and because I'm a big fan of hardware, so I was just thinking to talk a little bit about robots. So this market is booming a lot, and one of the, for example, figures that I want to show you here is that by 2050, only personal service robot population will reach to 10 billion. 10 billion, it's huge. So it's not even including industrial robots. And we also, of course, in the previous presentation, talked about robots will, take our jobs. We hear a lot about that our, jobs are at risk, and there are some, skills that if we stay relevant and if we focus on that, like mostly emotional intelligence, we can still keep our jobs. We also tend to make robots more like humans. We create a nice space for them to make them, more friendly, and sometimes we forget about the behind of these machines, that they are not humans and they are still machines. So since we're in Asia, I would like to talk about the example of this Chinese man who created a robot and he married with this. The question is that how ethical is that? We talk a lot about ethics. Where are we going? What are we doing with ourselves for the well-being of our future generations? And a big famous professor, Ishiguro, he's actually a researcher, a Japanese researcher. He's one of the main people in contributors to robotics, and he's basically is the first person. It's actually an art. He's basically created a twin of himself, very similar to himself, and he basically has iterated many versions of them, and this is actually one of the last ones. So the interesting point here is that we keep trying to create robots who are more similar to us. We try to make them more human, and this difference, this line is becoming thinner and thinner. The difference between a machine and a human. Why are we doing that? And so the other side of it is that we're creating these machines that sometimes they might come against us. In this case, I don't know how many of you know this, but it's called Russian feather, made, of course, by Russia. And so the claim behind this production is, we want to send this robot to Mars. But somebody should ask, why a robot needs 2 guns in Mars? So, what is humanity? What remains from us being human when every day we're creating more robots, more applications that they are doing a better job than us? So we are actually creating self-driving cars who are driving better than us, safer. We are having robots who are operating better than us. So we tomorrow won't, give our heart to be operated by a human. We might, fear that we're gonna die. We are having basically assistants who are not getting tired because they're machines. So we're replacing humans by machines. So what remains for us humans if all these jobs are getting taken by only machines? And yeah, we talked also about basically the fact that we reached a point that we create this artificial intelligence machines. Then we get to a next level, which is artificial general intelligence, like actually a machine which is exactly as smart as a human. And there are chances that we reach to a point that these machines create a more intelligent version of themselves that are more smarter than humans. That's the case of super intelligent machines, and all the theory of singularity and the big catastrophe that is coming in the future, that they're gonna disappear the human race. So some big minds of AI today are talking about humans must become cyborgs to stay relevant. So Elon Musk is saying that, they call him also Iron Man. There are some nice effects about it, so I would like to talk about it. This guy is called Nate. So he was born with a disorder that he could not see colors. What he came up with an idea was to connect an antenna to his brain directly so he could hear colors. Basically, a Van Gogh painting for him would be a sonata of Mozart, let's say. Professor Warwick is actually more extreme. Basically, he transformed all his body into a full-length machine. I really like your slide, Hannah, that you were showing the human's evolution. So now we were a little back in the era of having cell phones. Now we're adding gadgets on ourselves, like becoming more like augmented. Human transformation is coming, and then later maybe we're gonna be just like really integrated with machines. So this guy is one of the big contributors to the AI and robotics domain. This guy actually is a friend of mine called Liviu. He has a startup called NorthSense, and they are basically putting a piercing that you can feel the north everywhere you are in the world. So you become actually a self-GPS. And Newton Howard, an ex-CIA agent, he is creating basically Kiwi. It's a chip you can implement it in your brain that you can become smarter. So this is essentially at the beginning for those who have some brain disorder, but don't you want to be smarter? Maybe you could use it too. Not all of them are, of course, positive. So some of these ideas having more, illegal, basically, products. So dangerousthing.com is a website I came across by chance. Basically, mostly they sell NFCs that you can implant it under your skin. You can open your doors, any door, that you program it. But they also sell knives that you can implant under your nails. So the question is that, do we really need to have knives under our nails? What was the producer was thinking of? That's the value of this product. And what are the ethical, frameworks for preventing this? The truth is that AI, all technologies, all these machines are the extension of their creators. So basically, the engineer behind it, the CEO behind that company was thinking, that's a brilliant idea. I can make money, or I can make something special. So I am doing this, and I'm extending my beliefs and mirror it into a product. So that's where it comes, the question of ethics and the bias and all these things become very important. So I just really go quickly on the examples because we don't have enough time, but like Nikon photo was basically considering Asian people are blinking when they smile, and Google photo was tagging black people as gorillas. We also import our stereotypes on the internet. So internet is a big biased database. Who is responsible in correcting these stereotypes and putting them in the right set of database with a clean data that we can have a basically inclusive application? So my focus at Women AI is to help women to basically be more empowered in this field, young generation, young girls to study more in AI and STEM, because we have a really, really big gap in this domain. And in France, I live, is 15% only STEM, and AI is even less. So we really need to put more gender diversity in this field as well. One of the big basic leaders of our era, Jack Ma, says something that is very interesting during the last World Economic Forums. He believes that women are a very big asset to companies, and because they are more caring, they can care about the companies too. So he believes that because women, they have a higher emotional intelligence skill that maybe was more practiced, not because men doesn't have it, they don't have it, but because it was practiced by women, so they have this capacity. And I believe that when we talk about what remains for us as humans, is actually this part of humanity, which is emotions. We are humans, so we have emotions, and that's the only thing that we can be better than a machine. And we talked a little bit about science fiction, so I want to finish my presentation with this quote from Ray Bradbury, that he is a godfather of science fiction. He says, "In science fiction, we dream." I think that one of the ways to expand our knowledge and know more about the universe and what is happening out of our Earth is to use our imagination and science fiction to think of a new gadget, new technology to help us and empower us to reach that level. And I think all those gadgets that we have that makes us cyborg or whatever, they're not necessarily bad, because human being life is very short. How we could reach that to know what is happening in the whole universe is maybe with the help of these technologies. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mujan. That was an incredibly rich presentation. Looking a little bit at the frontier of the application of some of these things, we're not perhaps quite there yet, but this is round the corner. And when Ernest Hemingway was asked how he went bankrupt, he said, gradually and then suddenly. And you get the impression that technology advances like that, gradually and then suddenly. So as we think about these advances, this is to segue into Martin's presentation. Government has to be looking ahead. Now, Martin, you're the government representative here because you're the National Digital Advisor for the Government Office of Estonia. So perhaps you could wrap things up for us.
Yes, hello everybody. There has been a lot of interesting talk about important stuff and a lot about gadgetry. I come from a country of Estonia. This is 1.3 million people. And basically, together with Korea, we've been leading the digital governance throughout the past 20 years. So I would say that we have some expertise and some know-how on building digital governances. But I'm also responsible for information society and innovation, and all things related to artificial intelligence. So this thing will basically change everything how we perceive. So there's a lot of bluff in this domain. A lot of out there has gone in, as you mentioned, the billions flow in, and especially looking at from the government side, governments are always lagging behind. They're always doing stuff very slowly. Then we need to change fast. As mentioned, probably in all different talks, we're living in an age where technology is changing fast and fast. So I would point out that I think government job is the only job for government is actually teach the society how to adapt to those changes. a lot of gadgetry is coming online. We saw different robots, different algorithms. Digitalization is doing a lot. But I feel that politicians and governments in general need to be more humble towards technology and perhaps emphasize and work on the culture and mindset. Personal opinion is that France and Germany can pour their billions into AI strategy, but they cannot change anything because they are based in a fundamentally paper-based culture. Thus, they actually lack the data to actually change the formal governmental processes. Governmental processes are embedded into laws and regulations and mainly in the mindset and culture of bureaucrats. Changing that needs more than gadgetry. Changing that needs time and actually a plan. My point and argument for today is Estonia fundamentally has a distributed architecture system in terms of digital governance and in the technical architecture as well. We've implemented this already in 2001, thus we actually have seen the cultural change. The previous, usually when politicians talk about digitalization, they tend to look at the quantitative. They do digitalization because it seems cheaper, more efficient. But throughout the 20 years of building a process in Estonia, the tools we use start to change the way we think. When there's a hammer in your hand, everything seems as a nail. So now it's not only about the quantitative, but it's also about the qualitative, the user-centric, the ease of delivering that service for the citizen. The social agenda needs to be in the epicenter. I think India's AI strategy is the only one today that actually looks at the social agenda. Otherwise, strategies look at industry. The human needs to be in the loop, in the vision. So, the problem with those AI strategies is that most governments globally lack the actual fundamentals of digitalization. Yes, we all use computers and stuff like that. We have a smartphone for 10 years. But most governments lack a secure digital identity to actually authenticate themselves. They don't have a digital signature. Thus, the society and users are actually not used to using digital tools. More fundamentally, they actually lack the way of exchanging data in a safe and secure way. Thus, the easiest solution for many countries comes with Big Brother and centralized databases. In Estonia, we don't have the one ring to rule them all. We have distributed architecture. Different databases contain a small proportion of your data. Thus, the security threat and the potential of building a Big Brother is not there. As we see things roll out in China, I think we need to have a kind of a lighthouse or an example how we can actually build this change without compromising the values that some of those were mentioned. In Estonia, we have built a digital society on the idea that every person is the actual owner of their own data. Government is merely providing a service of keeping that safe. Just before this talk, we were having a discussion with John about my data, the idea that you actually control your data. This will go live next year in Estonia. So, if you're thinking about AI and digitalization, then I think AI will put digitalization on steroids. The stuff that was done previously will grow exponentially. Thus, we need to have fundamentals. Most of the governments lack it. In Estonia, we are working on lots of stuff in terms of AI and government. I think one of the conceptual main parts is the AI law, or KRAT law, K-R-A-T-T law. This is a concept that basically we should solve algorithmic liability in a more broader way. The problem is that legal complexities are growing with the technology, and if in like 10 to 15 years, self-driving car and a drone and a self-driving ship with one very strange circumstances would collide, then the room will be full with lawyers and they will discuss who has a better paragraph and argument. Those people and that room are not creating any new value, they're just spending it. Thus, we need to make the legal systems comprehensible and less complex. Our AI law approach, or the credit law approach, is trying to solve that. This needs to be user-friendly. Everybody needs to know who is the guilty guy. Making legal systems more understandable is fundamental. There are many, many technical engineering problems in actual implementations of AI. In Estonia, we actually have the data to get those fundamental processes. We haven't used any paper documents for 10 years, and I can basically do everything online except getting married and buying, selling real estate from this phone on this stage. And a lot of them have to do with privacy. In the last session, there was talk about privacy-preserving technologies, how we actually get the value of AI, that all of these gadgetry promises, how do we actually render it to the social good and the well-being of our citizens? There is lots of engineering challenges of how to do that. We are working on that. Lots of cybersecurity issues, how to actually enforce the data integrity of those algorithms and IoT systems. There are different concepts and ways of looking at it. But still, I think that my personal opinion is that those governments and large-scale organizations that are not able to make this transition happen will not survive the next 10 to 15 years. Millennials are not expecting a DMV type of a user experience that they have in the US, for example. Millennials are not expecting to fill out papers. Millennials are expecting personalized services, which is something completely different, which the current governments fail to render. I think Estonia is moving towards a conceptual state of an invisible government. The idea that if you're ever entitled to anything from the government side, you get it automatically. A very good example of those kind of proactive or services is when a new Estonian will be born next year, both of their parents will receive an email, congratulations for the boy or the girl, you get this much money from the government, this much money from the municipality, don't worry about kindergarten, and if you want to put the name, click here. The idea is that you necessarily don't need to do anything to get that. We are building this type of invisible government, and AI and all automated digitalization stuff is the very fundamentals of it. We already have the most efficient public sector per capita globally because of digitalization, but I think this can pimp it up a bit. But I think very important and fundamental is that the citizen is always in the epicenter, and the values also discussed here by John, for example, the ethics, these are very, very fundamental. But from a country of 1.3 million people, we actually are in the turmoil of the global discussion. But we hope to provide a positive example how these kind of tools, data, can be used in a positive way, so that other larger countries can also follow that or build their own. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. There's a lot of really exciting stuff happening in Estonia. When he said that governments that don't evolve as quickly as Estonia has will not survive, I sort of wonder what the process is. I mean, you know, the deadening effect of the bureaucracy, I suppose, might linger. And maybe it's about not taking advantage of the situation as much as facing an existential threat. But look, we've got 5-10 minutes left, and as I look around an audience that contains, you know, Andy Wyckoff, Joe Stiglitz, there's even some British civil servants in the room. It feels right to me that I turn the floor over to you and see if anyone's got any questions or comments. I'm looking for a microphone. Is there a microphone? So I'll take a couple of comments. There's a gentleman here, then we've got a question here at the front, and then a third question there. So we'll take those three.
Thank you for the excellent discussion. One general comment and one disagreement. The general comment is that I think we are not putting enough emphasis in the future of work because of artificial intelligence and robotization. Linked to the future of work, an increase in inequality due to different skills in the society. I think this is the most fundamental ethical issue, and I think the discussion didn't be enough on that. And then a disagreement on the data, who should buy the data to the owners of the data. No, the data are our data, it's my behavior. And I think if we think about well-being and the future of well-being for the society, data should be a public good. Of course, without killing research and development and innovation, which is generating those data in the digital funds. But there is a need for governance and regulation to make sure that the data, my data, your data, are at the end serving the society as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Second question was the lady at the front here. If someone could bring a microphone.
So as John mentioned, there's developing a well-being metric for artificial intelligence and autonomous systems. That well-being metric is based on other metrics that are out there, such as the Sustainable Development Indicators, the OECD, and we have sort of, for example, satisfaction with life, questions around flourishing. So my question in particular to Hannah is, are well-being metrics in and of themselves ethical? Is there an ethical and value statement in the well-being metrics in and of themselves, understanding that we are measuring well-being not just in terms of satisfaction with life, but also aspects of what Bhutan calls other domains of well-being, right? So everything from your environment to your work, to your time balance, to your community, to your social support, and education, to your trust in government, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Does that make sense, that question? Are well-being metrics ethical? Do they have a value statement in and of themselves, well-being metrics?
Okay, so are you talking in terms of gender, basically focusing on a gender inequality, or it's open?
No, and we talked about, with developing AI, it's going to follow the values and the ethics that it's a reflection of our ethics and our values. So if we have a well-being metric to measure the impact, the well-being impact on humans, are those well-being metrics in themselves based on the value system?
Right. I think it's a really great question. We talked, I think it was John who mentioned it, that how could we basically evaluate the values, like how we could speak about values at the beginning, say, is it a value? Or we agree with that, the thing that you're creating, for example, in a product, as a value, is it a real value? So I think that's the main question we should ask, and then we can think of what is the framework to create afterwards.
I think that yes, they are ethical. I mean, why not? We are just measuring the quality of life of these people with they are accepting it, and they are contributing to these surveys, So yeah, I don't think it's unethical to measure these different parts of our well-being. I mean, it's good. On the contrary, it is good because it will help to identify what is lacking in order to have better lives. It will, user experience and user-centered design. And when you design a product, you take the user experience into account and you put the user in the center of your design, right? So it's the same. If we want to design better lives, it is very important that we ask the people about that. And this is the design of a better life, using putting the people at the center of it. So I don't think there's a ethical problem behind these metrics. In the contrary, in my opinion, it's good.
We're going beyond GDP, right? So we're changing our efforts into what we're measuring.
Thank you very much. You had a direct answer to that question, but let's take the third question from the gentleman at the front now.
South Korea. Thank you for excellent five speakers. So my question about it's not a matter of the AI, it's a matter of the people. Is that right? So the concept of the smart city is widespreading everywhere. So while we focus on the technology point of the smart sensor or the AI technology, you're losing the way of the well-being. Because the well-being is a multi-dimensional concept related to quality of life or social welfare. Isn't it? In this case, you need to define more configurable data set which computer machine should understand your question or your query. In this case, you need to define framework model, some kind of the executive model, because individual, household, community has a different level of the techno, social, economic demand and request. So we should define what is the model of the well-being which computer understanding or the figure out your quality questions. Is that right?
Thank you very much for that. So three questions there. One, and I see some more hands, but I'll turn to the panel before taking any more. So the question of the future of work. I think it's a fair point that we didn't quite delve into that as deeply as we might. And then also something about the trade-off of retention of ownership of data, which clearly there is a will and a desire for, against the fact that AI only functions if it has this data and will only make the advances that will deliver us the positives if we feed the beast, as it were, with the data. So one question there. Second question around the choice of the metrics. That choice is itself a value-laden choice, and so there has to be a discussion around that choice. Otherwise, you risk embedding some potentially some biases or some cultural bias in that. And then thirdly, I think a very valid point around the need for a clearly defined and agreed consensus-based framework for well-being, for us to then judge the impact of AI on that well-being. All very, very good points. Does anyone want to come back on any of these? I'm looking for volunteers.
I invite the men because you have answered.
It is true, we have an unfair distribution of labour here. Women are doing all the work. Gentlemen. John.
It's a great book by Martin Ford called Rise of the Robots. And not to be a skeptic, but he made this point about machines working with humans. Where the primary metric of value is GDP or exponential growth, I think it's sort of unfair to say to corporations, hey, try to keep humans in jobs. When there's law, shareholder value is law. You are, by law, supposed to maximize returns, not just make a little bit of profit. And Martin Ford makes the point, a lot of times where humans work with machines, and that's a narrative that I believe is true. The danger, however, is that at some point, the machine is actually also learning that job. And I'm a writer, I used to be an actor. I'm used to being out of work. A lot of people aren't. Since 2008 in the United States, many people are used to being out of work now. And there's no one knocking on my door saying, hey, you want training for what's going to happen when AI comes? So I don't mean to sound negative to certainly the United States or technology, but the fundamental aspect of when you have a primary every quarter, the door closes and the thing, I say this all the time, the 5 words that will destroy humanity. Did we make our numbers? If that question is only, do we make our profit-oriented numbers? And by law, that's the focus. It's not that people are bad or their intentions are bad. That's irrelevant. Thinking about ethics and morals is really important. Every quarter, the one question that drives the decisions you make, if it is first and foremost about making fiscal numbers, that is how the priorities will continue to go. So in terms of jobs, I think it's semantics to say, well, this job will never be replaced. And And I say with all due respect, I have so many colleagues working in emotion-based AI. There are tons of people who prefer emotion-based systems to humans. It's not my decision to say, no, you should prefer people. So that's where, if the triple bottom line mentality I talked about before, my dream is that a CEO will go into her shareholders and at the end of every quarter say, we made our fiscal numbers, and here's how we made our environmental and our people-oriented numbers as well. And the shareholders will say, if those other numbers are not matched at the same level as the fiscal numbers, they'll say, well, don't focus as much on the fiscal numbers. We have to make sure that our environmental and people-oriented numbers are higher to make up for the loss.
Thanks, John.
I would like just to add about like losing jobs, something that like with the increase of technology, you know, there's something very good is happening. Learning now is open to everybody, you know. Like we are, thanks to AI as well and technology, we are able now to take learning from the classroom and specialization from universities to the computer. And so we should commit to long life learning. So what if the boring jobs like that are done by automatized now are finished? It's okay, like I don't want a job where I have to, I don't know, modify 100 text and like work with really boring stuff, okay? So it's okay if we lose some boring jobs, as long as we are committing to learning, like long life learning, that we are open to learning the new things, okay? And with AI, we are creating lots of opportunities, so there are lots of places for new jobs. And also with technology, we are now creating the opportunity to freelance, you know? Like the number and the percentage of freelancers is increasing more and more and more. So it is an opportunity to us to learn new things and to specialize in new areas and to like freelance and to do our own thing. Like I think it's a good thing. Might it be a good thing?
Thanks, Martin.
So a small remark from the bureaucrat side as well. Personally, considering sitting behind a desk and moving pieces of paper from one pile to another, considering that the job is something that needs to change fast.
I've become rather good at that over the years. I'm gonna take. Look, it's always tempting when you're chairing a session at the end of the day to let things run, but we are over time. So I know you guys have got things to do. I'm gonna, in the interest of gender balance, so we've had two male questions and one female. I'm gonna take a question from this lady here.
Thanks, Chris. I'm curious what the panel thinks, or anyone in the room, thinks about this question about the future. So hypothetically, there could be all different kinds of scenarios, and for gross simplicity and cognitive load, I'm just going to say utopian and dystopian. What do you guys think will be the biggest factor or driver that determines that difference? Like if you're higher on that axis or lower on that axis, that makes the difference between these better and not so good futures. And of course in the context of AI and society.
Big questions, that's one for you, Martin.
Privacy. So basically, well, in a way, there would be like, one wise man said there are people who divide the world into two and those who don't, so currently I'm the one that divides. So if China is leading the pack of countries building Big Brother currently, then I would argue that Estonia is leading the pack of countries not building it.
Does anyone else want to come in on that?
I actually did not like, get the question. Can you repeat it?
Do you want to?
Basically, I'm asking for what factor do you think would make the biggest difference in whether AI results in better well-being for society or less well-being for society?
I think that it is the acceptance of people for that. You know, if we are working on like investing in companies, in AI companies, if you are doing all of these conferences about AI, it means that like there's some potential, okay? And people are interested in that, and people want AI to be integrated more and more in our society. So if people are accepting to this new technology, and if we implement the ethics that we have to, if we define the ethical framework and we implement it, I think it should be okay. So I don't know if I have answered your question.
Thank you very much. It's always tempting when you have a question like that to assume that government action might be the thing. That for me is the sort of unstated question of how much government action now is needed, and that's probably the big debate that we need to have. I'm gonna draw things to. I'm very sorry, Alan. I know you're raising it, but there's people who need to eat their dinner. I'm gonna draw things to a close. It's been a very good discussion. Thank you very much to all 5 presenters. Thank you for staying with us to the end of the day. Thank you again to our hosts for what's been a really rewarding and rich day. Perhaps you could just join me in showing our appreciation to the speakers and their reports.